You do, yes. Nice to meet you here, and to have you coming on here in just a few seconds, I guess, on Tri-City Sports Now. Are you ready to go about your story?
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah, State of the Southern Conference. East Tennessee State is a favorite, but who could play spoiler? Blah, blah, blah. Let's go do this bad boy, okay? I'll come on and...
Good, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let me do this here, and I will talk to you... I'm going to give a short intro here. So, John Hooper, who goes on the internet as on Twitter as SoCon John, is a writer for Mid-Major Madness. His credentials, along as being a lifelong Southern Conference fan of both football and basketball, include writing for not only Mid-Major Madness, but the Fansided Network, working at one time, if I am correct, for USC Upstate in Spartansburg in their media relations department. Is that correct there, John?
That is indeed correct.
And also you are an Appalachian State graduate from the days when ASU was in the SoCon. Is that also correct?
Correct. That was a heyday for Appalachian State football, especially.
Yes, I can obviously contending for national championships. I remember the big games against Marshall in the 90s, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, now he covers for Mid-Major Madness college basketball. He's always been sort of a keen interest in Furman. But I guess before it goes, the name of the story, and I'm holding it up on our Facebook Live right here because I've printed it out, is State of the Southern Conference. East Tennessee State is obviously the favorite. They're in first place by 2.5 games. But who could play spoiler? Because anything can happen in Nashville in the conference tournament in a little over a month. I want to ask you, first of all, John Hooper, would you be able to conceivably see any way in which ETSU could make the NCAA tournament without winning the Southern Conference tournament? After all, they are 58 right now, or at least they were at the start of the week in RPI, and there are 68 teams taken. Do you think that this is any kind of a possibility that maybe this could be a year in which, if there is an upset in the SoCon tourney, 2 bids out of the SoCon for the first time in history?
It's feasible. I think because I look back the 2014-15 season when Wofford, I remember the end of the regular season, they were 54th in the RPI. And I thought, if they don't win the Southern Conference tournament, will they make it? And they ended up going on to win the Southern Conference tournament, of course. So that was the highest RPI I can remember. I know some of those Davidson teams go back to 2009, where I guess maybe in the lower 50s like ETSU, but then I think it was the 2009 tournament, Davidson lost to College of Charleston in the semifinal. Of course, they had Steph Curry that year, and then College of Charleston had Andrew Gadlock, and Davidson did not get in. So, there's 2 ways to look at it. I think it all depends on the conference RPI, and I also think it depends on if you look at the other mid-major conferences, such as the Colonial, which is a good comparison because I think the Colonial is a little bit down this year, and I think that the SoCon's had some good wins over that conference, which may help East Tennessee State out in getting an at-large bid should they not win the Southern Conference tournament.
Well, you go in a little bit about the history here, and that Davidson team that didn't make it was, I thought that was surprising because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the year after Steph Curry had led Davidson to the Elite Eight, and I still say that if Bob McKillop draws up the shot with 16 seconds left for Curry to take it and not try to whittle away time of the 16 seconds instead of going right after Kansas, I still say that if Davidson gets that shot off and wins that game, they go on to win the national championship. Yes, you heard me there. I think they beat North Carolina, which laid an egg in the Final Four against Kansas, and then it would have been going up against Memphis State, and of course Memphis State choked that game away in the finals. I think Steph Curry, Davidson, yeah, they would have won the national championship. My opinion. But that's another thing where I would go. Why is it that the Southern Conference, and you mentioned the RPI, but why is it that despite great history, if we look back at ancient history, West Virginia out of the Southern Conference played for the national championship with Jerry West in 1959, Davidson preseason #1 in '64 by Sports Illustrated, and for that matter, recent success from Mercer, from Chattanooga, from Davidson. Why can't they get more respect from selection committees?
I think that's a tremendous question. And, you know, even East Tennessee State, I look back to the late 80s, early 90s teams when you're beating, you know, the BYUs that had so many good players out west. And you look at when ETSU, I think it was a 92 tournament, 93 tournament when they beat Arizona in the opening round and then went on to play the Michigan Fab Five. You know, you would think that would, see, and that's the difference in college basketball. It's a season by season thing. But in college football, let's say, you know, the SoCon on reputation from years past gets a lot of those decisions where they might come down between one team and the other in the FCS playoffs because of reputation and how many national championships and how well they've done in the playoffs. But in college basketball, it doesn't seem to be that way. And you look at teams, I go back to 1976 and VMI, I guess they were an Elite Eight participant. Davidson, obviously what they did in 2008 with Steph Curry. So you wonder why these the committee doesn't look at these past results as much as maybe they do as the college football committee does when weighing a decision as far as who makes it and who doesn't in a tournament field.
Now, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought up VMI. I mean, we can talk history of Southern Conference basketball. But yeah, in the late 80s, listen to me, mid 70s, VMI was a nationally ranked program, the Running Roos. They haven't done much since then, but they were at one time nationally ranked. And Furman, the year before in 74, I think they made the Sweet 16 before losing to Buzz Riddle's Pitt Panthers, who ultimately would lose to the national champion NC State. We're talking John Hooper of Mid-Major Madness. He went to Appalachian State, and I want to ask you, before I get into your story, about 10 years ago, I can remember Appalachian State made a bid for an at-large berth out of the Southern Conference. They didn't make it. They took, if you recall, a big ad out, a full-page ad in USA Today to basically state their case that they should be in the NCAA tournament. It wasn't successful. Is that the reason why Appalachian State now is in the Sun Belt and not the Southern Conference?
I mean, I think you make a great point. I think that has a lot to do with it. Because if you look back at that season, Appalachian State won at Davidson, and it was their first game, home loss in like 44 Southern Conference games. Appalachian State won at Wichita State. They beat a Virginia team and a Vanderbilt team who both made the NCAA tournament. In fact, Vanderbilt went to the Sweet 16 that year. Appalachian State won the San Juan shootout. And they lost. They ended up losing in the semifinals of the Southern Conference tournament, if memory serves me correct, to College Charleston and Dante Draper, who had 38 points and just a thrilling game in overtime. And so, yeah, they took out. You're correct. They did take out an ad in USA Today, and I think they also took one out in the Indianapolis Star, which is obviously the home of the NCAA office. So they spent a lot of money.
I like that. Yeah.
To try and get Appalachian State in the tournament, and it didn't end up panning out. But, I mean, if you make that point, what you said, I mean, the SoCon, we know it is a great league, but the national media doesn't seem to see it the same way we do. pretty good league. And even Rick Barnes, after the Furman game, said, he's like, I'm late to the press conference because I was watching the rest of the Wofford, North Carolina game. And he said, it's a pretty good league.
Well, I think it's a pretty good league, like you said. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a great. I would reserve that for, say, the SEC or the Big 12, and that sort of thing. But, I do think that it is worthy of notice and some consideration. That being said, last year, the RPI of the SoCon, 15, okay, upper half. And I started thinking because earlier in the decade, there were as many as 13 conferences that got multiple bids in the NCAAs. Could the SoCon be on the cusp for the first time? But this year, they're down to 17th in the RPI. You study the entire conference, John Hooper of MidMajorMadness.com. Why is the SoCon down 2 spots in the RPI this year?
Well, I think it has to do with, first of all, if you took the top 5 teams in the league, or 4 even, if you took, let's say, East Tennessee State, let's take Furman, let's take UNC Greensboro, let's take Wofford, and then you could even include Mercer in there, because of what they should have probably beaten Memphis and should have probably beaten Alabama on the road. Mm-hmm. But you take those 5 teams, they schedule pretty good schedules, and you look at it, and East Tennessee State should have beaten Xavier, let's be honest.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that, because I got hate mail when I said that people should not be happy with a 2-point loss to Xavier, or at least I got hate messages on the internet and all that. I've got a thick skin. I don't mind that so much, okay? But no, nevertheless, I supposedly had an agenda out against ETSU by one person who was not happy that I was not happy with losing, But anyway, and neither was Steve Forbes, the head coach of the Bucks, either. But no, it's a good point that you make there. And I guess that's one of the things about the mentality is that sometime in these mid-major leagues, it's, you'll play North Carolina. If you're Wofford, you beat North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Something that, you look at last night, Clemson beating North Carolina in Littlejohn. Right. They've never won and it's amazing to me, they've never won in Chapel Hill 60-odd times or so, and they've never won there. And you just get the idea of, but Wofford goes there and wins. Maybe there should be some more respect for the Southern Conference. Now, you go in your story, in addition to talking about, a little of the history and Davidson losing to a good Western Carolina team, by the way, in 95, that nearly with Frankie King, that nearly defeated top-seeded Purdue in the 95-96, I should say, in the NCAAs. A last-second shot went off the back of the rim. Otherwise, they would have been the first 16 seed to beat a number 1. But you look at these spoilers, and you mentioned the schools you just said, Furman, UNCG, and Wofford. I like UNCG because I like Francis Alonso a lot. Of course, there's also Fletcher McGee. But if you have to choose one to knock off potentially ETSU somewhere along the line, who's that team going to be?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, I love the way, you mentioned UNCG, I love the way they defend people. I love the length that James Dickey gives them as far as the rim protector and what he can do. But, I mean, man, you got to look at the experience, I guess, that Furman has.
Siblings,
a lot of those guys have been together since 2014-15 when Furman was a nothing coming into the Southern Conference tournament, and here they go to the final to play Wofford. So in that sense, I would say experience favors Furman, but defensively, I like the way UNCG defends. I like what they do defensively, and I like how they can kind of slow the tempo of a basketball game and make teams really grind out a win. So I guess that's probably 1A and 1B. I'd probably have UNCG 1A and Furman 1B.
Were you surprised that the Citadel ETSU game on Monday was so close?
Yes and no. The funny thing is, and and I've talked to some coaches about this that from local schools, and they say that, you know, the way Citadel plays is so enticing that it can get your team to play that way. You know, kids want to play up and down basketball, let's be honest. It's hard to slow the game. You almost have to slow the game down to a half-court tempo against the Citadel and force them into playing a half-court game. But, you know, when you're in the heat of the battle and when you're in a game, it's hard to get that through to a player. And so when you get playing that pace and shooting threes, and we saw that with ETSU the other night, they were, 2 of 23.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to fall into that kind of mimic mode where you try and mimic what the other team is doing. And I think that's the hardest thing about playing the Citadel.
We're talking to John Hooper, otherwise known as SoCon John. That's what you'll find him, SoCon John 22, I believe, on Twitter. But you also see his work in midmajormadness.com, which is giving, and ETSU getting a lot of attention here this past week. Steve Forbes doing an interview with collegeinsider.com on a podcast you can check out. Of course, I think that we go a little more in depth in our weekly interviews with Steve Forbes here on Tri-City Sports Now. But I also wanted to ask you this here. Your opinion of ETSU this year. Look, DeSanta Bradford was coming on, recruiting. You never know what's going to come about. Sure, I had optimism about Peter Jerkin because he transferred from Indiana, but nobody really knew, hey, why didn't he start more last year as a 7-footer if he was so good? Are you surprised with how good ETSU is this year?
A little bit, but I'm not surprised at how athletic they are. You know, the MO of ETSU basketball over the years has been their athleticism. That's who they are. It's a weird comparison. If you look at a Brazilian soccer team, they're unconventional, and that's how they operate, and that's what the fans want to see. For ETSU basketball, it's the same way. Fans want to see the excitement. They want to see the athleticism, and to ETSU's credit, they played to that, and Steve Forbes' credit, he's played to that in recruiting. But not as much on the offensive floor as on the defensive end of the floor. And I think that's been the most impressive thing to me this year. I actually think this team is more adept defensively than the team, say, last year with TJ Cromer and those guys. I think this team is better defensively, and I think it has a lot to do with having Peter Jerkin in there as a rim protector. I think it has a lot to do with what you look at with who I think is the best defender on the team is Jermaine Long.
I agree.
And he's kind of the underrated player on this team, but I think he's probably a guy that I would say is one of the best defenders, if not in the conference, but in mid-major basketball.
You know, it's funny because I know you're a soccer fan, and I mean, in soccer, there's often the time, the term mark the striker. You put a defender on the striker and all that at all times, so hopefully they won't get the ball on the best player. Well, in many ways, this is what Long does for the other team, and on their best scorer, certainly did this with Francis Alonso in the Bucks' 10-point victory against UNCG earlier in the season. And Alonso's the second leading scorer in the league, and a per-game average was held to just 10 points. In fact, I remember I was in one of the assistant coaches at ETSU told fans before the game, we don't want Alonso to shoot from the right side, and I believe he only took 2 shots from the right side. That's how much Long was marking him, for lack of a better term, if I may use a soccer term. Anyway, John Hooper of SoCon John 22 on Twitter and midmajormadness.com. I do want to ask a couple more questions here, because you follow the whole conference. Why is Chattanooga so bad? I know they lost everybody, but it's Chattanooga. I mean, ETSU loses 4 guys, and they're still good. Chattanooga, they're not supposed to be 8-15. Why do the Mocs stink?
No, they're not. And, a lot of fans in my country are disappointed. But the one thing they did lose that ETSU did not lose was a coach.
True, and an athletic director.
Correct. And so I think that makes it hard. And they've had some injuries. And listen, they're playing better now. I mean, they're a better team now than they were a month ago. We could see that the other night. But, the thing about Chattanooga is they've got some good guards. I mean, I think Chapman's probably one of the better young guards in the league, and Nat Dixon's a good guard. I think they got some pieces, and they could be one of those teams that could challenge for a top 6 seed, and we could see them, maybe not have to play on the opening day of the Southern Conference tournament. But traditionally, I mean, Chattanooga fans are used to, obviously winning games and winning championships, and it seems like this season's a little bit more towards the end of the John Schulman era, to where they were struggling to draw people, and it just seems like it's been tough. But in Lamont Paris's defense, this is a great season. It's a great period. Whereas John Schulman had won a championship in 2005, it had been a successful coach, and towards the end of his career, it sort of went, unfortunately for him, because I really like him as a person, went south.
It's funny you mentioned John Schulman, because I remember being a high school student at University High when he was an assistant for Joe McPherson of the University High Junior Buccaneers. That's the high school that basically ETSU runs, for lack of a better term, okay? So, and he also married a woman by the name, formerly known as Amy Engel, who was a fantastic basketball player from Unicoi County, which is where our studio is located here on 1420 NBC Sports Radio Tri-Cities. But that just leads me to wonder, I now must claim ignorance. I don't know what John Schulman is doing now. What is he doing now?
That's a great question, because, I haven't researched it that much since he left Chattanooga. But it's interesting. If you look at the Chattanooga basketball program, they've had, some turnover. Will Wade leaves. And granted, Will Wade, I thought, was a great coach. But none of us expected him to be there a long time, because he was kind of one of the young, up-and-coming coaches in college basketball. So then you enter, Matt McCall. And what shocked me is a little bit that he leaves for the UMass job. And there are probably some reasons behind the scenes that he did that. But I just don't know that UMass, if he waits a few more years, maybe he gets a better job. You know what I'm saying?
I possibly, although, I think UMass, I think those great Calipari teams with Marcus Camby and the Final Four, I think about Dr. J, and I think about the Atlantic 10. I'm not going to criticize somebody for going to UMass, because I do think, although I'm a SoCon backer, I do think that Massachusetts is above Chattanooga on the totem pole. They've made the Final Four, and the history I just gave you, Chattanooga, relatively a young program. 40 odd years old or so. And although they've been nationally ranked and have a Sweet 16 and maybe are the cock of the walk program historically, at least recent history, in the SoCon, I think that, there is a few more riches at UMass. One could actually say the same thing about Steve Forbes, who interviewed at New Mexico this past off season. New Mexico's a respectable program. I remember when the Lobos hosted the Final Four. But at the same time, and ETSU's made the NCAAs 10 times. But New Mexico is the cock of the walk state school in the state of New Mexico. They do have a decent enough history, and I'm certain they can spend a little bit more money there too. I really think, and it's my opinion, John Hooper of midmajormadness.com, I really think that David Blackburn campaigning for the Tennessee athletic director job maybe no one will admit it, but that, I think, really doomed Chattanooga. And I even said on this show, he was so openly campaigning it and eventually did resign that at one point, if I was the Chattanooga president, I would have said, look, you want to be the AD at UT so badly? Go do that. But you're not going to be the AD here because you got to make up your mind.
You want to be here? Go on.
Yeah. I mean, I know where we are in the hierarchy, but at the same time, last year, the Mocs beat the Vols. You want to go join the Vols so much? Okay, fine. But we're a viable D1 program here, and I'll find somebody who wants to be in Chattanooga if you're going to openly campaign and make us second string, especially in a season in which our basketball team beats theirs. I would have done that immediately. And I know there's more money and more prestige at Tennessee, but nevertheless, I think that's where I'm going to stop it here. I enjoyed this. I hope we can do this again here, talking a little bit, maybe next month or so. But the reason why I want to stop it here is that, speaking of UT athletic directors, how long is Phil Fulmer going to have the job? He's talking about it. Nathaniel Rutherford of Rocky Top Insider is writing about it, and I'm commenting about it when we return on Tri-City Sports Now.
Firestone Destination Time.